back. Now, last week, the Gambia ratified the African Continental Free Trade Agreement. It was the 22nd to ratify the agreement out of the 55 member countries of the AU. The ratification giving effect to the trade agreement. The United Nations Economic Commission for Africa estimates a 52.3% annual growth as a result of the agreement. That's, of course, in trade across the African continent. Joining us now to unpack the effect of this agreement is Azwimpheleli Langalanga, the Senior International Trade Analyst at Tutwa Consulting. I also have in the studio here in Johannesburg with Ms. Simunza Muyangana, the co-founder and director of Bongo Hive, an African-based tech hub. And joining me from Nigeria, Lagos, is John Dagunro, a policy analyst. Gentlemen, thank you for coming. I want to start with you, Azwi, if I may, and get your take on what you see as the key beneficiaries out of this agreement, which we now, yes, we must celebrate, has come into force. Thank God, we should say, right?
Yes. No, I think the key beneficiaries, like in any other trade agreement where there is opening up of markets, are those countries that are able to take advantage of the market. These being countries that have a much developed industry that produce goods that can be sold in the market. So, in my view, the key beneficiaries in this regard will be the bigger economies of South Africa, Kenya, and Egypt.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, so the big countries, does that also necessarily translate into big businesses?
Most of the times it's big businesses that benefit because they are the ones that are plugged into the value chains that end up selling the products that have to be provided to the market. Yeah. So mostly it's big businesses.
Okay, so big businesses and the big countries, all right. Yes. Simunza, can I get your take?
Yeah. Yes, indeed. Whilst that's going to happen with big businesses, I think we also need to be very cognizant of the fact that but what happens to small businesses. And in this case, what lessons have we learned with regards, for example, when AGOA, for example, gave us the opportunity to export to the United States? Were we able to exploit that? Yeah. And if we weren't able to exploit that, how do we make sure that we can still protect small businesses who are the engines for economic drivers in most of our African countries? Are you
saying, though, that small businesses are going to benefit out of the African Continental Free Trade Agreement? That's exactly the question that I want you to address.
I would like to think so, but I'm fearful that do they have the competitive advantage of bigger companies in other countries that might be producing similar goods or providing similar services now that can now enter their markets more freely and compete with them in their own countries. And especially if these are still in emerging companies, small businesses are still in emergence.
Yeah, so I actually was hoping that you would extrapolate the learnings from the AGOA agreement and see if indeed small businesses were able to benefit in addition, of course, to the bigger established businesses.
I wouldn't claim to have. That's a question that I have as well. I wouldn't claim to have looked strictly into what happened with that, but I'm very aware that Zambia, being one of the signatories to the AGOA, I don't think we've exploited it completely. And those are the questions we now have. Speaking from private sector, is that can we exploit this new agreement and take advantage of it? Given that our population is around 16 to 19 million people, we welcome the fact that it opens the markets and allows us to then grow out into other markets. But of course, we also question: do we have the defensibility to then also make sure that we can hold market in our own countries?
Absolutely. Let's go to Lagos. Joe, from your perspective, who is likely to benefit out of this agreement? Before we talk about the fact that there's a big elephant that's sitting outside and watching this thing play out.
Yes, like the gentleman said earlier, he said Kenya, Egypt, and I'll add Morocco to that. A couple of all these countries, they are already having the network that are necessary, and they have been exporting. You can take, for instance, in Egypt, they've been exporting these luxurious commercial buses. And, Kenya, for instance, they have been exporting a lot of other, even flowers, I mean. And Nigeria has not been really exploring the market, even with the AGOA that was said, and it will take a lot of time. And we have to know that sometimes free market or free trade does not necessarily translate to fair trade. And that has been the problem. And I think Nigeria is sitting and watching on how it has to go. One may look at it that, okay, is it a good thing for us to join right now, or is another thing for us to watch and see how it goes? We're looking at the experience of what other countries have had. You see what is going on now with the UK, the Brexit issue. So there's no point. We've signed so many agreements, bilateral agreements, with different countries and different people. So we have to now streamline most of these things, not just signing agreement for the benefit of just signing agreements. And a lot of MOUs have been signed as well. So I think the government is looking at, let's streamline most of these things and look at what we get. No doubt there will be benefit for the continental businessmen and women. And I think it is not going to be an immediate thing because we have to look at the logistic side of it and the customs issue. So it's not something we can just rush into, but I think there will be benefit in the agreement if signed, and it's going to be in the long run.
Joe, I want to come back and talk about why Nigeria is sitting outside and watching this. But I wanted to first of all understand from your perspective, is it necessarily only the big businesses that are going to profit out of this? Is there a way in which small companies also will be able to benefit out of this? And also, I want you in that answer to answer the question around the smaller countries as well. Can they be active participants in this and enjoy good growth?
Yes, if you look at it from those two angles, you will discover that most of the countries, take for instance the USA, they will import raw materials that will be used for their own benefit, to complement what they have in their country. So if you don't have sufficient, as emerging market or emerging country, so what are you going to export? So you have to begin to develop locally, and before you can think of exporting. So most of the smaller countries, that are already in it, take for instance Malawi and some more of these countries, they have to find a way to balance the market. It is not as if it's not going to benefit them, but in the meantime, in the short term, it is only the big businesses. The small countries or small businesses, they have to queue for a long time to have the benefit.
Absolutely. Can I come to you and ask the question? So we have got the 22 that I have signed. So this thing is ready for takeoff. Yeah. I read some figures from the United Nations Economic Commission of Africa on the impact that this agreement is likely to have. I want you to critique those numbers first. And then secondly, I want you, if you can, help me to understand if indeed we are likely to see Egyptian cotton coming in greater numbers into Woolies in Johannesburg, and vice versa in terms of what's made here in South Africa, finding its way into Cairo or into Lagos or indeed into Nairobi?
I think there will be an impact. For me, at least, I think more at a psychological level with the signing of the agreement. Because if you look at the building blocks that make the CFTA, the SADC, COMESA, EAC, they have not really achieved what was intended in terms of regional integration and properly creating a market. Because first there is an issue of industrialization. You have to be industrialized in a way and have goods that you can trade among yourselves. The second thing, where there is some form of industrialization, there is a lot of barriers at the border. Trucks spend days at the Beitbridge border or at Kasumbalesa on the Zambian side. And these are some of the issues that will still be problematic for the implementation of the
AfCTA is not solving this? I thought that was the point of it.
At an academic level, there is that is being solved, but at a practical level on the ground, there is still a lot of challenges. Even infrastructure, you need hard infrastructure to carry these goods across these countries, and that has not yet been resolved. And that is why at a SADC level there is a push towards during the Zuma era they used to call it infrastructure-led integration. So you have to have the roads, these corridors, they have to be
ports that actually work, that are efficient.
Yes. And these are issues that we should focus more on without taking anything away from the signing of the agreement and the ratification and all these other issues.
Simunza, then I'm actually worried now, because if these problems still exist, then I'm thinking even in terms of the small business sector, this must make it even doubly harder for the small business sector to be a player in this if we are unable to get the goods moving and the infrastructure is not right.
Yes, but given that that's the case, then that's the role where entrepreneur support organizations like tech hubs and others come into play. Okay, is that part of the challenge that has been there, even when such agreements take place, is that the entrepreneur who's on this entrepreneur who's at the smaller scale doesn't understand how to tap into these opportunities.
Or the paperwork.
Oh, the paperwork, yes. So and you're absolutely right.
Because the other time I was sitting on a panel and we were discussing the paperwork in Egypt, actually, while they were talking about the intra-African free trade area. And I remember this guy writing on a piece of paper as the discussion was going on. And then after the panel discussion, I said to him, "What were you writing?" He says, "I was writing all the requirements that are needed for me to be able to get my product into South Africa."
Indeed.
It was like a page-long thing.
Indeed. So indeed, it's the paperwork, it's the standards that are required to meet, the standards that are required to get into, to start exporting into other countries. Yeah. It's being able to produce at that standard, the technical capacity or the technical knowledge to be able to produce to that standard consistently at a quality that can be accepted.
That's agreed at an AU level.
That's agreed at an AU level. Yeah. So organizations that's bringing up, and when you talk about, whilst tech hubs are mostly looked at as tapping into intellectual capital, you also look at incubators and other organizations, and so generally clustered together as entrepreneur support organizations.
Do we have enough of those things?
So if you say that you had about recent reports done by the GSMA Association and Village Capital look at over 400 tech hubs across the continent at the moment.
But these are tech hubs.
These are tech hubs.
They're not business hubs.
Not just, and that's aside from business incubators. Is then even those need the capacity to make sure that they last long and they have the technical knowledge to pass on this. Yeah. So this is an opportunity for these to add value towards the growth of entrepreneurs, the growth of the entrepreneur sector, the SME sector, and especially SMEs that have got the potential to scale up into medium and then larger size businesses, and then can chase market beyond their countries. If the average country around Africa is within the population range of 15 to 25 million people, that's a wide one. You need a larger market to be able to go to, and also to address the aspiring lower income market.
Absolutely. So we go back to the issue of the larger market. Let's go back to Lagos. Joe, so the question that we've all been holding back is, of course, why Nigeria is sitting outside watching this. As we discussed at the outset, it's the big countries that are going to benefit out of this. It's the big companies that are going to benefit out of this. On both scores, Nigeria scores. The biggest economy in Africa, with some of the biggest banks in the continent, as well as some of the biggest companies. Of course, Aliko Dangote, the richest African, and we are saying Nigeria is watching this. What is going on? I want you to sum up for us in, I don't know, maybe a minute or so, just the key issues. We have heard, for instance, that it's the labor unions that are unhappy about this. We've also heard that your big business sector is also unhappy about this. Why would you be? 1 in 5 Africans is Nigerian.
Yes, you just mentioned Aliko Dangote right now, but this is a gentleman that is expanding in Africa. The expansion rate is very high, and at the same time, this gentleman needs a visa to all the countries. To all the countries he goes, he has to submit his passport for a couple of days or weeks, I don't know, but he needs visa to go into all this. That's one of the problems you have. Right now, we're talking about the free trade, where there's so many issues that will make it a little bit more cumbersome to handle. And you have to look at the logistics side of it. You know, it will be very expensive to even export from Nigeria to some African countries. You know, if you look at it, sometimes you want to export into European countries or, you know, American countries or wherever, which is a lot more cheaper than even traveling within the African countries. I can say from here to, from Nigeria to Gambia, if you know what you pay, it's enough to take you from here to Italy. So these are a lot of problems you still have to face in trying to deal with the businesses. At the same time, there could be a lot of bureaucracies. How do we even promote some of the things we have? We need database to do this. We need informations. And some of the people that will be doing this, when you look at the agricultural sector of it, is going to take some time, and there will be standardization, which the gentleman just mentioned. How do we have the standardization? How do we train some of our people to cope with it? That is why AGOA in some instance has not been very effective, especially in Nigeria. And you have so many other things that has to be put in place. It is one thing for us to sign papers and not making it to work. I think that is why the president said, listen, let's look at this thing holistically. Let's look at this and let's meet the stakeholders. And once the stakeholders, and which I think he has done, and man is doing. And once the stakeholders happen to agree on certain areas, then it will be ratified. Signing it and not getting it ratified, signing it or getting it ratified and not being able to make it work, it's not the best for this country. And we have to be careful that, like I said, we have a lot of agreements signed already. And you have seen what happened between the NAFTA when the president said, no, I can't work with NAFTA again. If one person just gets up and says, look, I want to pull out of this, it may spoil the whole thing. So we have to be very conscious of it. We have to be very careful in going into some of these things. Looking at the pros and cons, yes, definitely there will be advantage. Nigeria stands to benefit from some of this things, but I think not joining it at the beginning does not mean that we cannot still contribute to the factor to see it work and to make it a viable project for the entire Africa and then come into it. Even when you look at the European Union it was not for everybody, did not just come in and say, look, some sit back and say, look, let's watch it, and they come into it gradually. So I think, I don't know what the government will do in the next few days or few months, but I think the government should be considering it as a matter of urgency. And don't forget, election is just gone by, and the new government is coming in. Thank God it's the same government that is coming in that has been handling it. That's why I'm saying thank God that they've been handling it, and then they will look at it more holistically and begin to say, okay, now is it the right time for us to come in, or let's wait and see and contribute to the development. And when it's coming out to be a stable thing, we can just be part of it. But I don't think they're just sitting down and watching it. They know the importance of it as well.
Let me get the response of the gentleman here. Quickly, gentlemen, if I can get your input into this. Does Nigeria have a point here? Did these other governments jump the gun here? Isn't there still too much work that needs to be done? Can I start with you, and then I come to you, Azwi?
I think it's okay for countries to be cautious, especially if you realize that
even if you're the biggest.
Especially if you're talking about your levels of industrialization. Are you at the point where you can execute and take advantage of the opportunity that is going to be held there, or are you going to be a net importer instead when this happens? Unless you're on a path towards industrializing as quickly as just like was mentioned here, then there's potentially a possibility for being cautious here.
I think Nigeria has a point. But I think my sense is that maybe what is happening in Nigeria also is that maybe the government is kind of held hostage by big business interests. But I think what the lesson to take from the Nigerians is that these agreements, they should be bottom up. They should be driven by businesses, not by politicians. And in Nigeria, you see that when business comes in, there's a lot of pragmatism around it. And I think the lesson we take from them is that these should be driven by businesses, whereas on giving the mandate to politicians and not the other way around.
Absolutely. Joe, I can tell you that I'm surprised by the outcome of this discussion. I thought everybody was going to condemn Nigeria. I'm standing alone. Gentlemen, thank you for your time. That's where we leave it for today. Thank you very much to all my guests for tonight's edition of our Capital Connection. Join us again every Monday and Wednesday at 6:30 p.m. Central African Time. It's good night from me and the team.